Right, so this video is a bad idea. You know it and I know it. And for anyone who clicked on this video expecting to feel an emotion other than contempt or perhaps disgust, all two of you, I would like to say a couple of things up front. 1. The concept of fictional incest is at least as old as Oedipus Rex, making it a fictional trope older than the compass, the astrolabe, or paper. Therefore, any storyteller younger than Sophocles employing it as a narrative device might not be the obvious harbinger of moral decay that the average virtue policeman might think he is. And 2, I want to ask an honest question about our collective understanding of cultural taboos, and I would like you to give the answer some honest thought. Between these two pictures, which would your most uptight relative find more offensive? How about these pictures? Feel free to file your answers away in temporary storage while I use the androgynous sounds of my voice to lay waste to my poor little YouTube channel by asking the question, why is fictional incest? Believe it or not, the decision to bring up this questionable subject matter did not come out of thin air. No, what precipitated this particular sojourn into Yikes City, USA was, this past Halloween, I experienced a cultural phenomenon known far and wide as the Rocky Horror Picture Show. This experience was not new or unique to me. What probably was unique to me was, sometime later, a dear friend who also attended the screening asked, "What do you think of Riff Raff and Magentas being a romantic couple and brother and sister?" And my answer at the time was, I don't think about it. Like, not in a visceral disgust way where I actively try not to think about it. It just hadn't crossed my mind to question that both of those things were true in the context of the narrative. A week or so later, this same friend brought up Halloween 6 in casual conversation, and how awful it was that Myers' child was maybe the result of impregnating his niece. And I heard myself say, is it awful? And it's a horror film, right? So I should have intuited that Michael's implied romantic tryst with his niece was probably not consensual. But I hadn't seen the movie at the time, and for whatever reason, I didn't presume the lack of consent part. At which point in the conversation, my friend gave me a quizzical look and said, "That's the second time you've made a low-key defense of incest in 6 days. Are you okay? Is there something you want to talk about?" And I said, "Does anyone want to talk about it?" Which was a stupid thing to say at that point because the obvious answer was yes. Someone demonstrably wants to talk about it because this whole random hot take was wrought by the fact that we had just witnessed a couple of fiction writers using this specific and generally discouraged family dynamic as a plot device. This writer used it twice. Therefore, at least to me, the question became, why incest, fellow fiction writers? And why might I, as a fiction reader, find myself pondering this taboo as anything other than a tacky attempt at adding shock value to one's work? And make no mistake, there is plenty of tackiness to go around in fictionland, not to mention tragedy in genres elsewhere such as, say, true crime, because life is unfair, and some genuinely unfortunate IRL people have to live with incest as a part of their personal histories. But like the incorporation of monsters, or sickness, or magical gadgets into one's narrative as a metaphorical device, often fictional incest is not merely included for shock value. Sometimes it's used in the spirit of expedient characterization, like in A Song of Ice and Fire, aka Game of Thrones. The family Lannister is, in fact, not inbreeding left and right because everything else in their life is going well. They live in and have directly fostered a low-trust culture, so toxic and riddled with brutal backstabbings, that the unforking of their family tree might be one of the least overtly malicious things they do. Elsewhere in fiction, affairs among siblings differ strikingly from Lannisters, and are occasionally written as love, capital L, love stories. Examples in this category, esteemed by some readers to be classics, are Ada or Ardor by Vladimir Nabokov, the nice controversy-free man who wrote this book, and The Blue Lagoon by Henry de Vere Stackpoole. The Blue Lagoon in particular was a surprise to me, in that before my research for this video, I knew it only as an overused punchline from 1980-something, and an excuse to say nasty things about Brooke Shields when she was a child actor. It turns out The Blue Lagoon is an adventure tragedy that has been on the planet since 1908, and at the time of its release, critics were enraptured by this book. They praised it for its, quote, delicate themes, unquote, and its likeness to Robinson Crusoe, and didn't even mention Dick and Emmeline's status as siblings. Apparently the New York Times and others saw the young castaways as sufficiently sympathetic, surviving against devastating odds, innocently bumbling their way through romance with no mentor, much the way Adam and Eve might have done. And the response of an empathetic readership through the years has been overwhelmingly positive. So that's all very well for storytellers who are maybe trying to make a point. But what about the ones who are merely trying to incite disgust or make a lazy joke? Isn't that a little crass? Shouldn't there be more sensitive ways to do that? Well, yes, of course. And again, there is no shortage of crassness among lazy storytellers. But even the crass ones have a point once in a while.
Howard Johnson is right.
Thank you, man.
And unless you're purposely seeking out lazy narratives, it's actually a lot harder to point to a nuance-free story that happens to include incest than you might think it is. For example, while I was drafting the script for this video, the unpaid archivist who straightens up my memory banks from time to time piped up and said, "What about Django Unchained? The character of Calvin Candy is pretty disgusting and is almost certainly an item with his sister." And I heard myself reply, yes, but A, the Candys are inbreeding for pretty much the same reason as the Lannisters. B, the Candys are racists who see themselves as American royalty, both of which are states of being that would lead them to view, quote, pure bloodlines, unquote, as their personal prerogative. And C, are we sure the Candys are supposed to incite our disgust for this movie? Because I can't help but wonder if the auteur behind Django Unchained was attempting to hold a mirror to long-standing sentiments toward the antebellum South, reflected far more glamorously in works like this movie, based on a book of some renown, in which the object of the heroine's desire is madly in love with his first cousin. See, while Gone with the Wind was hugely influential, and remains a work worth remembering as a part of our cinematic heritage, the exploitative institutions that made the antebellum South what it was are worth challenging today in ways the mostly white theater-going masses would not have thought to do when the movie first came out. Like the readers who had helped it outsell the Bible years before, I can't picture a hell of a lot of eyebrow-raising or pearl-clutching from the 1930s era populace who definitely saw the inbreeding, the intermarital assault, and the keeping of slaves, but might realistically not have seen anything wrong with any of those things. Whether they would have been unintentionally blind to it or willfully ignorant is not actually my place to say, but they would have been very much encouraged to grieve the antebellum South with Miss Scarlet, who now has to pick cotton by hand instead of frolicking through life in hoopskirts and pretending she was her slave's dearest friend. While we're here, the unpaid archivist from the memory banks would like me to remind everyone that Hamlet also exists. I'm not going to dwell too much on Hamlet because, as far as I can see, Shakespeare did not write the Prince of Denmark to have an Oedipus complex. But the formative movie production of this play would have been Laurence Olivier's, a guy who was apparently a Freud fan, and chose to interpret Hamlet as a particular brand of mother lover, and few directors since have questioned Sir Lawrence's interpretation. I certainly find it interesting that a frivolous call made by one lone director can change our perception of a story forever. And if, for whatever reason, your grasp on the rest of the story isn't great, that one provocative item of subtext might be all you can think about, and oops, the video has themes now. So, to get back to the shock value stuff, specifically the junk found in the aforementioned Halloween 6, and attempt to do it thoughtfully, let's back up a little bit. Many years ago in a land called Canaan, there were these two towns called Sodom and Gomorrah. Yes, this is me backing up a little bit. I am that stinking old, good luck proving it wasn't an eyewitness account. The reason Sodom specifically has long been synonymous with homosexuality is because in chapter 19 of a book called Genesis, it says, "The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them, and bowed down with his face to the ground. 'My lords,' he said, 'please turn aside to your servant's house.' He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so that we can have sex with them.' Lot went out to meet them, and said, 'No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have two daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them.' Lot's first name, incidentally, was not Lanza. 'But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof.' 'Get out of our way,' they replied. 'We'll treat you worse than them.'" Now, a lot of the same folks who believe that the book of Genesis contains the inerrant word of God will occasionally point to Genesis 19 and say, "See, God hates homosexuals so much that he killed a whole city of them back in the day." But smarter people than I am have read this same text and felt it strongly begs the question, are we sure this implies God hates homosexuality and not that God hates rape? Because both intents are strongly suggested, but only one of those things tends to be preached about as chief among sins. Similarly, if by chance you happen to be one of the folks who is disgusted by Halloween 6, you're not wrong. The incest-related subtext is absolutely used for shock value where it is tactless and unnecessary. But if that subtext bothers us more than the assault and brutal murder of Michael's niece, might the writer have accidentally called out our tendency to unconsciously dismiss other fictional evils as ordinary? Because once a writer makes you see one thing as disgusting, you could theoretically examine the rest of the narrative and find so much more to get disgusted about. Likewise with Rocky Horror Picture Show. A lot of folks don't tend to put the emphasis on the horror part. But Dr. Frankfurter is, for all intents and purposes, using newborns for sex, then killing them when they're old enough to rebel. If we find ourselves more disgusted by the consensual romance between these two adults than the many other affronts to human decency conducted by Dr. Frankfurter, might we be getting hung up on the wrong stuff? Maybe. As always, thank you for giving these videos a shot. I can't actually picture anyone liking this video, so if you leave me a diplomatic comment, it'll be a nice surprise. If you leave a nasty one, the robots don't care. They're little Sith Lords who feed on your hate, and will likely use it to get more eyeballs on this video. Until we meet again, take it easy. I wouldn't bother trying to talk to you about uncomfortable stuff if I didn't love you. Bye.